The envelope had been sitting on Joel Mercer's kitchen counter for 11 days. He knew what was inside it. He had written the check 3 times, torn it up twice, let the third version dry out on the counter like evidence of his own failure. The rent was 42 days late in Chicago in November, with a heating bill that had arrived looking like a short novel. 42 days felt like a verdict. He was 29 years old, and he had moved to this city with a laptop, a portfolio, and the kind of confidence that only survives in smaller towns. Chicago had educated him quickly. Clients disappeared. Invoices went unpaid for 60, 90, 120 days. His savings, which had looked respectable in Ohio, looked almost embarrassing here. He was not broke in a dramatic way. He was broke in the slow, grinding, quietly humiliating way that nobody talks about at dinner parties. The apartment itself was worth every dollar he owed on it. Third floor of a red brick building on a tree-lined street in Lincoln Square, with tall windows that caught the afternoon light and original hardwood floors that creaked in the same spot every single morning. Someone had loved this building once. You could feel it in the walls, in the way the radiator knocked, like it was trying to have a conversation with you. In the small iron hooks by the front door that were older than anything Joel owned, he knew the building belonged to Sophia Hartwell. He had met her once briefly when he signed the lease 14 months ago. She had been composed and professional, a woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked, dark hair, and the kind of posture that suggested she had never once slouched through a hard moment. She wore a cream blouse and small gold earrings. She had reviewed the lease carefully, asked him a few quiet questions about his work, and shaken his hand with the firm, unhurried grip of someone who had made 1,000 decisions and was comfortable with all of them. He had not seen her since. The rent went through an online portal. The building's maintenance was handled by a quiet man named Robert, who appeared, fixed things without ceremony, and disappeared again. Sophia Hartwell was a presence felt but not seen. It's the way certain people are. So when the knock came on a Tuesday afternoon in the third week of November, Joel assumed it was Robert. He opened the door in a paint-stained t-shirt and immediately understood that it was not Robert. Sophia Hartwell stood in the hallway in a dark wool coat, her hair pinned back simply, her eyes carrying something he had not expected to see there. Not anger, not coldness, something heavier and quieter than both of those things. She looked like a woman who had recently been through something enormous and had not yet decided how to carry it. "Mr. Mercer," she said, her voice was steady, "I apologize for coming without notice. I wanted to speak with you about the account." Joel felt the familiar heat of embarrassment move up the back of his neck. "Yes," he said. "Come in, please." She hesitated for just a moment at the threshold, the way people sometimes do when entering a space that belongs to someone else and suddenly feels too intimate. Then she stepped inside. He watched her eyes move across the apartment quickly, not with judgment, but with the particular attention of someone who has owned something for a long time and still notices everything about it. He cleared a stack of design books from the chair near the window and gestured for her to sit. She sat with both hands folded in her lap, coat still on, and he noticed something then that he had not noticed in the hallway. Her left hand. The ring was still there, a simple gold band, but the skin around it was slightly raw, as though she had been touching it constantly, turning it without realizing. "I can have the check to you by Friday," he said, standing near the kitchen counter, because sitting felt wrong. "I had a client situation. It's been a difficult few months, but I have 2 contracts closing this week, and I can cover everything. The full amount with the late fee." Sophia looked at him for a moment without speaking. There was no hardness in it, just a kind of careful attention, as though she was listening to more than his words. "Friday is fine," she said quietly. There was a pause between them that was not uncomfortable exactly, but full. He could hear the radiator. He could hear the street outside. "Would you like some tea?" he asked, because it was the only thing he could think to say, and it felt true. She looked slightly surprised. Then something in her face did something small and almost invisible, a softening barely there. "I shouldn't," she said. He moved toward the kitchen anyway. "I'm making some for myself," he said, which was not true, but was said so naturally that it became true. She did not leave. She took her coat off and laid it over the arm of the chair and sat back slightly. And Joel filled the kettle and found two mismatched mugs and did not say anything for a while because silence felt like the right thing to offer her. My husband passed away, she said from the chair by the window. 8 days ago. Joel set the kettle down carefully. He turned. She was looking out the window at the gray November street, and her hands were still folded in her lap. And she said it the way people say things they have said too many times already in too many rooms, with a flatness that is not indifference but exhaustion. I'm sorry, he said, and he meant it the way you mean something, when you have no other words but the ones that matter. She nodded once. Dennis managed most of the building accounts. I am learning to do things myself again. She paused. I came here myself today because I needed to do something myself today. Joel understood that he did not say so. He poured the tea. She stayed for 40 minutes. They talked very little and said quite a lot. She held the mug with both hands and looked at his work pinned to the corkboard above his desk and asked him one question about a logo design. She noticed a simple question about color, and he answered it carefully because she seemed to actually want to know. When she left, she paused at the door and looked back at him briefly. Not with anything he could name, just a look. Quiet and full and somehow mutual. Friday, she said. Friday, he agreed. He stood in the doorway after she had gone and listened to her footsteps on the stairs. And then the building went quiet again. But it felt different now. The quiet. It felt inhabited in a way it had not before, like something had entered the space and decided without announcement to stay. The check was slipped under Sophia's door on Thursday evening, one day early. Joel had written it carefully, the numbers precise, the signature steadier than he felt. He had added a small note on a plain white card, nothing elaborate, just 3 sentences, full amount enclosed, including the late fee. Thank you for your patience. I hope you are resting when you can. He had stood at her door for a moment after sliding it under, listening to the silence of the first-floor apartment, and then walked back upstairs, feeling like a man who had done something small but honest. He did not expect anything in return. He was not looking for anything. That was what he told himself walking back up to the 3rd floor, and he believed it completely. And it was also not entirely true. The building was 4 stories with 8 units. Sophia occupied the ground floor herself, the largest unit, the one with the bay window that faced the street and the small back door that opened onto a narrow garden Joel had never seen anyone actually use. In the warmer months, he had noticed a wooden bench out there, weathered to a soft gray. The clay pot beside it that held a plant that had clearly been loved and then for some reason abandoned. He had thought about that plant occasionally. He was not sure why. November turned colder. December arrived without ceremony. Joel landed both contracts he had mentioned to Sophia and paid his December rent 4 days early, logging into the portal with something close to pride. He did not see her. He heard her sometimes in the mornings, the faint sound of movement below him, the occasional muffled rhythm of a radio playing something classical and low. The building breathed around her, and he had started to notice that breathing the way you notice a sound only after it becomes familiar. It was the hallway light on the 2nd floor landing that gave him an excuse. Though he would not have called it an excuse at the time, the bulb had been out for nearly 2 weeks. He had mentioned it to Robert through the building's maintenance portal, and Robert had acknowledged the message, and nothing had happened. On a Saturday morning when the stairwell was dim enough to be genuinely inconvenient, Joel went to the hardware store, bought 2 bulbs of the right type, came back and changed it himself. It took 4 minutes. He felt slightly foolish about how good it made him feel. He was descending the stairs when Sophia's door opened. She was wearing reading glasses pushed up on her head and a dark green sweater, and she was holding a coffee mug. And she looked different than she had the first time he saw her in the hallway. Less formal, more real. The composed professional armor of their first meeting had been replaced by something quieter and less defended. The way people look inside their own homes when they forget to perform. She looked up at the landing, and then at him, and then at the light. That's been out for 2 weeks, she said. I know, he said. I put in a request, but I had the bulbs, so... She looked at him for a moment. Thank you, she said. It was simple and direct and carried more weight than the words themselves. I have an extra bulb if you need one anywhere else, he said, which was not flirting. It was just true. She almost smiled. He saw it begin at the corner of her mouth and then settle into something more contained. a warmth that she held close rather than displayed. "I'll keep that in mind," she said. He would have continued upstairs. The conversation had a natural ending point, but she said, "I saw your note with the check," and he stopped on the second step. "I meant it," he said. She nodded slowly, turning the coffee mug in her hands the way she had turned her ring at their first meeting. "Dennis always said that good tenants were rarer than good building," she said. "He would have liked you, I think." Joel did not know what to do with that. It landed somewhere in his chest and stayed there. "That means something," he said quietly. "Thank you." She nodded again and went back inside, and he climbed the rest of the stairs, feeling the warmth of it all the way to the third floor. After that, things shifted in the small and incremental way that real things shift. Not dramatically, not with declaration, but with the slow accumulation of moments that individually mean very little and collectively mean everything. He started noticing things about the building, the way you notice things when you are paying attention to someone without admitting it to yourself. The loose hinge on the front entrance door that made it drag against the frame in cold weather. The mailbox labels that had faded to near illegibility. A section of grout in the lobby tile that had cracked and was letting in a draft. He fixed the hinge on a Sunday morning without telling anyone. He printed new mailbox labels on his good printer at home and left them with a note for Sophia in her mailbox. He mentioned the grout in a building maintenance note, formally through the portal, just as any tenant would. But Sophia noticed. Of course she noticed. She had owned in this building for 22 years, and she knew every inch of it the way you know the face of someone you've loved for a long time. She noticed because she was that kind of woman, careful and attentive, someone who paid attention to the world, not because she was suspicious of it, but because she respected it enough to look. One evening in the second week of December, she knocked on his door. She was holding a small container of soup, still warm, the kind that has been made from scratch on a cold afternoon by someone who needed to do something with their hands. "I made too much," she said. It was a graceful lie, and they both knew it, and neither of them acknowledged it. So he took the container with both hands. It was warm against his palms. "This is kind," he said. "Fixed my mailbox labels," she said. "You made me tea in my own apartment," he said. She laughed. It was a short, surprise sound, genuine and unguarded, and it was the first time he had heard her laugh, and it changed the texture of the hallway completely. He found himself wanting to hear it again immediately. The way you want to hear a piece of music again the moment it ends. She did not come in that time, but she came back the following Friday with a question about a design project. She explained it carefully, a small task for the building. A flyer for a tenant's holiday gathering she was organizing for the first time alone. Dennis had always done the holiday gathering. She was going to do it herself this year, and she wanted it to look right. He sat with her at his kitchen table for an hour and a half with his laptop between them, and they designed something together. Simple and warm with a dark green border, and a font she chose herself after he showed her 4 options, and she considered each one with the seriousness of someone who understood that small choices matter. She was decisive, and she knew what she liked, and she was not afraid to say so. And he found that extraordinarily refreshing in a world full of people who performed uncertainty to avoid seeming difficult. When they finished, she looked at the screen for a long moment and said, "That's exactly right." Not enthusiastically exactly, but like a woman who knew the difference between exactly right and had stopped accepting almost. He printed 20 copies on his good paper. She gathered them carefully, tapping the edges straight against his table and stood. "You're good at what you do," she said, looking at the flyers. "You knew what you wanted," he said. "That makes the work easy." She looked at him then, a direct and measured look, the kind that sees you rather than just locates you. "Not many people say that," she said. "Usually they say it was all them." "It wasn't all me," he said simply. She left with the flyers tucked under her arm and her coat buttoned against the cold. And he closed the door and stood in his quiet apartment and looked at his kitchen table where 2 coffee mugs sat side by side and felt something he had not felt in a long time. He felt like himself, fully and without apology, like the version of himself that existed before the city had spent a year teaching him to be smaller. Patricia Hartwell appeared on a Saturday 2 weeks before Christmas. Joel saw her in the lobby. Tall woman in an expensive coat with her mother's bone structure, but none of her mother's stillness. She was on her phone when he passed, and she looked at him with a brief, assessing gaze of someone cataloging a potential problem. He smiled politely. She did not smile back. He heard them through the floor that evening. Not the words, just the rhythm, Patricia's voice fast and pushing, Sophia's voice slower and unmoved. He did not listen deliberately. He simply lived on the second floor above the first floor, and the building carried sound the way old buildings do, honestly and without apology. The next morning, Sophia was in the small back garden on the weathered bench, the first time he had ever seen anyone out there. She was sitting with her coffee and her coat, and her face turned up toward the pale winter sky, and the abandoned clay pot beside her had been cleared out and held fresh soil, dark and damp, ready for something new. He did not go down. He watched from his window for only a moment, just long enough to see that she was not sad. She was thinking. There was a difference, and he was beginning to understand it. The particular quality of Sophia Hartwell's silences, which were never empty, but always full of something moving slowly toward a decision. He went back to his desk and opened his laptop and found himself unable to work for a very long time. The Seattle email arrived on a Monday morning in January, when Chicago had buried itself under 8 inches of snow and the city looked clean and muffled and temporary, the way cities look when winter reminds them who is actually in charge. Joel read the email twice at his kitchen table with his first coffee going cold beside him. It was from a design firm he had contacted 7 months ago, back when he was desperate enough to reach out to anyone. A real firm with real clients and a real salary and benefits and the kind of professional stability that his mother in Ohio mentioned every single phone call without quite mentioning it directly. The offer was good. It was better than good. It was the kind of offer that a 29-year-old freelancer in a city that had spent 14 months humbling him was supposed to accept without deliberating. Relocation package included. Start date flexible. They wanted an answer within 2 weeks. He closed the laptop and looked at the snow falling past his tall windows and thought about Sophia Hartwell, and then told himself very firmly that Sophia Hartwell had nothing to do with this decision, which was a thought so unconvincing that it lasted approximately 4 seconds before dissolving completely. He had seen her 6 times in the past 3 weeks, not arranged meetings, nothing with that kind of intention attached to it openly, but 6 moments that had accumulated with the quiet insistence of water finding its level. She had brought him a book she thought he would like, a collection of design essays from the 1970s she had found while going through Dennis's study. He had read the entire thing in 2 evenings and returned of it with 3 pages of handwritten notes tucked inside because he could not help himself. She had read his notes and then appeared at his door the following afternoon with responses to 2 of his points written in her precise, unhurried handwriting on the back of an envelope. And they had stood in his doorway for 40 minutes discussing a single essay about negative space, and neither of them had noticed the time passing until the hallway went dark around them. He had learned things about her in those weeks the way you learn things about a person when neither of you is trying to make an impression. She drank her coffee black and very strong. She had studied architecture for 2 years before switching to business, and she still talked about buildings the way architects talk about them, from the inside out as structures that exist in relationship to the people moving through them. She had traveled to Portugal 3 times and wanted to go again. She slept badly and had for years and did not complain about it. Simply worked around it, reading in the early hours before the city woke up. She had a dry and precise sense of humor that arrived without warning and landed perfectly and then disappeared again before you could fully appreciate it, which made you pay close attention at all times in case you missed it. She was 63, and she had lived in ways he had not yet lived, and she carried it not as weight but as material, the stuff she had built herself from. He was 29, and she never made him feel young in the diminishing sense. She made him feel young in the honest sense, early, full of time, with things still ahead of him that she could see clearly because she had already passed the place where they were visible. He did not tell her about Seattle immediately. He told himself he was still deciding. This was partially true. The tenants' holiday gathering came and went. Sophia had organized it carefully, and it was warm and well-attended, and she moved through it with the particular grace of a woman who knows how to hold a room without commanding it. Joel stood by the window at one point and watched her talk to the elderly couple from the 4th floor. The way she leaned toward them slightly when she listened. The way her hands moved when she described something. And he thought about negative space, about the essay they had discussed in the darkening hallway, about how the most important part of a design is sometimes what you leave out. Patricia was there for an hour. She stood near her mother most of the time and looked at Joel twice with an expression that was not hostile, exactly, but was precise in its message. He understood the message. He did not blame her for sending it. In the second week of January, on a Thursday evening, when the cold had settled into the serious and permanent register that Chicago reserves for the deep part of winter, Sophia knocked on his door at 7 o'clock in the evening. She was wearing a dark blue sweater, and her reading glasses were on her face this time, rather than pushed up on her head. And she looked slightly uncertain, which was unusual enough that he noticed it immediately. "I was going to make dinner," she said. "I keep making too much food." "You keep making too much food," he said. "I do," she agreed, and the corner of her mouth moved. He went downstairs for the first time. Her apartment was everything the building promised and more. Tall ceilings and bookshelves that covered entire walls and lamps that made warm pools of light rather than the flat overhead brightness of practical spaces. There were photographs everywhere, not arranged for display, but simply present, accumulations of a life lived fully and with attention. Dennis was in many of them, a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes and an easy smile. And Joel looked at those photographs with care and respect, because Dennis Hartwell had clearly been a person worth looking at carefully. She cooked without fuss or performance, moving around her kitchen the way people move in spaces they have inhabited long enough to stop thinking about them. She gave him a task, chopping vegetables, because she was not the kind of person who let guests stand uselessly at the edge of things. And they worked alongside each other in the easy silence that had become their particular language, the language that required no translation and left no one behind. They ate at her kitchen table and talked for 3 hours about her architecture years and why she left them, about his Ohio town and why he left it, about the specific loneliness of cities and the specific loneliness of small places and how they were different kinds of loneliness entirely. About Dennis, whom she spoke of with love and without performance, a woman who had grieved honestly and was learning to live on the other side of grief with the same honesty she brought to everything. At 10 o'clock, he helped her wash the dishes, and she dried them and set them in the rack. And at some point, their hands were close together on the same dish, and neither of them moved away, and the kitchen was warm, and the snow was falling again outside the window, and the city was quiet in the way it gets quiet when snow falls at night, muffled and held. He told her about Seattle while they were still standing at the sink. He did not plan to say it then. It arrived honestly, the way true things arrive when you are finally in a place where honesty feels safe. He told her about the offer and the timeline and the salary and the relocation package. And he watched her face as he spoke, and her face did not change in the way he had half feared it might. She did not become distant or composed or formal. She listened the way she always listened, fully and without interruption, turning a dish towel in her hands. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "It's a good offer," she said. "Yes?" "You should think about it carefully," she said. "I have been," he said. "I've been thinking about it carefully since I got it, and I keep arriving at the same problem." She looked at him. "What's the problem?" He looked back at her. "I don't want to leave this building," he said. The word building sat between them with its full meaning and its additional meaning. And Sophia Hartwell, who was not a woman who misunderstood things, understood it completely. She set the dish towel down on the counter. She looked at the window where the snow was pressing softly against the glass. She looked at her hands. She looked at him. "Joel," she said, and the way she said his name was different from every other time she had said it, quieter and more direct, and carrying something she had not let it carry before. "I know," he said gently. "I know what you're going to say." "You don't," she said simply. "You're 29. You're 63, he said. "I know that. I've known that. It has not changed a single thing about any of this for me. And I think you know that too." She was quiet again. Not the thinking quiet this time. Something else. Something that looked, if he was reading it right, like a woman arriving at the edge of a decision she had been approaching for weeks and finding that the ground at the edge was more solid than she had expected. "Patricia thinks I should sell the building," and she said. "She thinks I should move somewhere smaller and quieter and simpler." "What do you think?" he asked. "I think," she said slowly, "that I have spent enough years doing the practical thing." She paused. Dennis was practical, He was also the least boring person I ever knew. He would have told me that practical and alive are not the same thing. Joel did not speak. He waited because she was not finished. I am 63 years old, she said, and she said it not with apology or defiance, but with the clean authority of a fact she had decided to own completely. I have more past than future, and I know that, and I am not afraid of it. But I am also not willing to spend whatever is ahead of me being careful about the wrong things. She looked at him then with the full directness that was the most characteristically Sophia thing about her. That refusal to look away from what was real. I am not a romantic story, she said. I am a complicated woman with a complicated life and a daughter who will have opinions and a grief that is still present and real. I know, he said. I am telling you clearly, she said, because I think you deserve clarity. And I am telling you clearly, he said, that I am not going to Seattle. She looked at him for a long time. The kitchen was warm. The snow fell outside. Somewhere in the building, the radiator knocked its familiar conversation against the pipes. Then Sophia Hartwell, who had built everything in her life with careful hands and full attention, took one step toward him, not dramatic, not rushed, just a single honest step, and said, then stay. He did. Not because the offer wasn't good, not because Chicago suddenly became easier, or the freelance work suddenly became simple, or any of the practical things resolved themselves into neatness. He stayed because some things are worth choosing without guarantee, because the truest decisions rarely come with clean logic attached to them, because he had learned in 14 months in this city that the most important rooms are the ones that make you feel like yourself. And he had found one on the first floor of a red brick building on a tree-lined street in Lincoln Square, in the warm kitchen of a woman who knew exactly who she was and had decided after a long and careful life that she had room for one more good thing. Patricia came around slowly, the way practical people come around when they love someone enough to eventually trust their judgment. It took 4 months and one dinner and a conversation Joel was not present for. But Sophia told him afterward that it had ended with Patricia saying quietly and grudgingly and with obvious effort that her father would have liked him. And Sophia had said she knew. The clay pot in the back garden had something growing in it by March, small and green and pressing upward through the dark soil with the particular confidence of things that had been properly planted. Joel noticed it from the garden bench one morning, where he and Sophia sat with their coffee before the city fully woke up, her shoulder against his arm, the pale early light coming through the bare branches overhead. He did not say anything about the plant. He did not need to. She had already seen it, and she was already smiling, contained and warm and entirely her own, the way she did everything, the way she had always done everything. The building breathed around them, old and solid and full of life. And the morning was quiet, and they sat inside it together like two people who had both, in their own time and from their own direction, found their way home. Here's a heartfelt paragraph based on the story. In the end, this story teaches us one of life's most beautiful truths. True kindness and understanding have the power to heal even the deepest wounds and spark love where we least expect it. Sophia didn't see a struggling tenant when Joel couldn't pay his rent. She saw a human being carrying heavy burdens, just as she was carrying her own grief. At 63, she chose compassion over judgment, and in doing so, she reminded us that age is only a number, while the heart remains timeless. Love doesn't follow rules or timelines. It grows in the quiet spaces where we dare to be vulnerable with one another. What touched you most about this unexpected connection? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I truly read every single one. And if stories like this move your heart, please hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another emotional journey. See you in the next one.